My aunt handed me a small ceramic pot the morning they discharged her from the hospital. It was wrapped in a dish towel that still smelled like her kitchen, wood smoke and dried lavender. And she pressed it into both my hands the way you press something into someone's hands when you're not sure you'll see them again. She told me not to open it until I had built something no one could dismantle. She said it quietly, like she was giving me directions to a place she'd already been. I didn't understand what she meant then. I do now. My mother ran the most respected ceramic restoration studio in Savannah, Georgia for 32 years. When people in the antiques world say Savannah, they often mean her. The Aldridge name was on certificates of authenticity for pieces that had passed through Christie's and Sotheby's and the private collections of people whose names you'd recognize if I said them. She started the business from a rented corner of a shared art space downtown, just her and a portable kiln and a set of tools she'd bought secondhand from a retiring conservator in Charleston. By the time I was in high school, the Aldridge studio employed 11 people, held restoration contracts with 4 museum collections along the southeastern coast, and had a waiting list for private commissions that ran 14 months long. It was extraordinary work. She was extraordinary at it. She was also the kind of person who experienced her own success as a form of authority over everyone near her, and she exercised that authority the way she applied adhesive to a fracture line, with absolute precision and zero tolerance for deviation. My older brother absorbed her methodology early. By the time he was 24, he was managing client intake and vendor relationships like he'd been born reading spreadsheets. He knew the markup on every restoration material in the supply chain. He spoke and led times and liability windows. He was the plan, clearly written and already laminated. I was the inconvenient footnote. I threw pottery, not restored it, not cataloged it, not managed its provenance documentation. I made it from raw clay on a wheel in the garage my mother had converted into storage for crating supplies. I started at 13 because my school did an elective workshop, and I couldn't stop thinking about it afterward. By 15, I had a used wheel I'd bought with 2 summers of babysitting money and a small electric kiln I'd negotiated from a ceramics teacher who was retiring. I threw before school. I threw on weekends. I kept notebooks full of glaze formulas and firing temperatures and cross-section sketches of forms I wanted to try. My mother looked at this the way she looked at a client who wanted to repaint an antique instead of restore it. Patient, slightly pained, waiting for me to come to my senses. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Sunday afternoon in March, 6 weeks before I turned 19. I had been accepted into the Ceramics MFA program at the Savannah College of Art and Design. Not on a partial grant, a full merit fellowship, renewable for 3 years, specifically for what my portfolio review panel called an unusually mature integration of functional and sculptural form. The department director had written me a personal letter. I had read it so many times the fold lines were starting to separate. I set the letter on the kitchen table where my mother reviewed her weekly commission correspondence every Sunday afternoon. I surrounded it with 6 pieces I'd made that winter. A series of Unomi cups in a matte ash glaze I'd developed by testing 17 variations over 4 months. Each one was different. Each one was right. I stood in the doorway and watched her come in from the studio, wash her hands at the sink, sit down, and look at the table. She picked up the letter. She read the whole thing. Then she set it down, walked to the refrigerator, poured herself a glass of water, and drank half of it standing at the counter with her back to me. When she turned around, she told me the fellowship was impressive. She told me making pottery was a beautiful way to spend time. Then she told me the Aldridge studio needed someone to manage the documentation and client relations side of the business because my brother couldn't continue carrying that load alone, and that my future was already shaped and waiting for me to simply step into it. I told her I wasn't going to do that. She looked at me the way she looked at a crack that had propagated further than the estimate. Measured, contained, already calculating the cost. She told me that if I chose to walk away from the family business to pursue what she called a studio hobby, I should understand that I was walking away from everything attached to it. No supplement to my living expenses, no access to the family vehicle arrangement, no expectation of inheritance or equity in the business. She said she wasn't punishing me. She said she was simply being honest about how businesses worked and how families worked when they were also businesses. I told her the fellowship covered tuition, housing stipend, and studio access. She picked up 2 of the Unomi cups from the table. She carried them to the back door, opened it, and set them both on the concrete step outside with the focused efficiency of someone clearing a workspace. She didn't throw them. She just put them outside, which was somehow more efficient in its dismissal than breaking them would have been. She told me handmade pottery was a commodity. She said any competent ceramicist could make what I was making. She said I was proposing to spend 3 years acquiring a credential for a market that was already saturated with talented people making beautiful objects that no one could afford to buy. Then she went back to her correspondence and didn't look up again. I went to my room. I sat on the floor next to my wheel, which I'd moved up there the previous year when she'd needed the garage back for a large crating project. I looked at the 2 remaining Unomi cups on my shelf. Then I remembered the ceramic pot my aunt had pressed into my hands outside the hospital 6 months earlier, the one still sitting wrapped in that dish towel on my bookshelf, unopened. I got up and unwrapped it. Inside the pot was a folded index card. My aunt's handwriting, small and exact the way she wrote everything. It said, Horizon Credit Union, member number 4088112. Security question answer, the road. Underneath that, 2 lines, I have been watching you work. This is for the work. I sat with that card for a long time. Then I called a car to take me to my friend's apartment, where I stayed for 2 nights while I figured out next steps. I did not cry in front of my mother. I'm not sure why that felt important, but it did. SCAD's graduate housing placed me in a studio apartment 4 blocks from the ceramics building. The fellowship stipend was $1,400 a month, which in Savannah was workable if you were careful and didn't make mistakes. I was careful. I had been precise about resources my entire life. It was one of the things my mother's house had accidentally taught me. The Monday after I moved in, I went to Horizon Credit Union on Bull Street, member number 4088112. The security question asked for the name of the road my aunt grew up on. I knew it because she'd told me once, years ago, on a long drive where she talked about her childhood, the way adults talk to children when they forget the children are listening. I gave the teller the answer. My aunt had been depositing into that account for 9 years. The balance was $11,400. She had never mentioned it. Not at holidays, not on the phone calls where she asked about my glazes the way other aunts asked about grades. Not when she visited and watched me throw for 2 hours without saying anything, and then told me my centering technique was getting very good. She had just been quietly, methodically building something she planned to hand me at the right moment. I sat in my car in the credit union parking lot for 30 minutes. I did not go back to my apartment. I drove to the ceramics building and started working. I did not use my aunt's money on comfort. I treated it as what it was, foundation capital. I used $200 of it to purchase a used gas kiln from a ceramics program at a closing community college in Augusta. I rented firing time at a shared studio on Tuesdays for the first semester, while I made arrangements to get the gas kiln transported and installed in the space the MFA program allocated to graduate students. I developed 41 distinct glaze formulas during my first year, documenting each one with the obsessive rigor of someone who had always believed that rigor was the only thing you actually controlled. By my second year, I had a name. I filed paperwork for a small business under the name Saltmarsh Ceramics. The name came from the low country landscape I'd grown up in, the tidal marshes east of Savannah that shift color, depending on the hour, blue-gray in early morning, gold-green in afternoon, almost black when rain was coming. I wanted work that had that quality, present but not fixed, shaped by conditions but consistent in character. I started selling at the Forsyth Farmers Market on Saturday mornings. I brought a folding table, a cloth the color of wet sand, and whatever had come out of the latest firing that I considered finished. The first Saturday I sold $110 worth of pieces. By the following spring, I had a 6-week waiting list for custom commissions and a small but loyal set of buyers who came back every market week and brought people with them. I graduated with my MFA in 3 years. I did not invite my mother. I did not invite my brother. I went to dinner afterward with 2 friends from the program and my thesis advisor, who insisted on paying and ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget and said the meal was a program investment. It felt like enough. It felt, honestly, like exactly enough. The years after graduation were not easy. They were necessary, which is different. I moved 40 minutes north of Savannah to a small city, where the rent was lower and the maker community was real and interconnected in the way that sustains rather than just decorates. I signed a lease on a 750 square foot studio space in a building that had been a textile warehouse and still smelled faintly of machine oil. I painted the walls myself. I poured a new concrete floor section for the kiln placement with help from a friend who'd done construction work before art school. I built my glazing station from reclaimed shelving I found in the building's storage bay and a workbench I assembled from plans I found online. My first hire was a woman named Vera, who had a degree in industrial design and had been making functional ceramics independently for 3 years and needed a workspace and a reason to commit fully. She was 27. She showed up on her first day having already read every interview I'd given and printed out my glazed notes from the thesis documentation I'd made public on my website. I paid her what I could. She stayed. By year 3, Saltmarsh had been featured in 2 regional design publications, 1 national craft journal, and a long-form piece in a home and living magazine that described my work as belonging to a new American functional tradition, pottery that understood its own utility as a form of beauty rather than a compromise of it. I gave interviews only about process and material. I redirected personal questions, not as a strategy, because the work was genuinely the point. I had grown up watching my mother perform herself. I wasn't interested in performing, my mother knew eventually. The craft and design world in the Southeast is not large. My brother sent me a text about 18 months after I'd left, 2 words, saw the article. I replied, thanks, that was the entire exchange. 8 months ago, a man named Garrett walked into my studio on a Thursday morning. He wore a navy blazer and carried a tote bag from a design fair I recognized. He introduced himself as the purchasing director for Wren House, a hospitality group that operates 11 boutique properties across the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast. He said their food and beverage director had recently drawn a hard line that every property needed genuinely distinctive tableware. Not sourced, not generic, not catalog. He said a chef at their Savannah property had pointed him to Saltmarsh. He said a purchase inquiry sheet on my workbench. Wren House wanted a long-term wholesale agreement for custom functional tableware across all 11 properties. Full table settings, continued exclusivity. The initial contract value was $620,000 over 4 years, with renewal options. They wanted the story attached to the product. They wanted my name on the menu cards. They wanted me to be visible. I read the terms. I told Garrett I needed a week to review with my attorney. He said to take 10 days. He bought 4 pieces on his way out, 2 plates and 2 cups, and paid without asking the price first. That evening, I was at my workbench reviewing questions for my attorney when my phone lit up. Unknown number, Georgia area code, I answered. It was my mother. She didn't begin with the greeting. She began the way she began meetings with contractors whose performance had been inconsistent, direct, slightly elevated in volume, pre-positioned as the authority in the room. She told me she'd heard about the Wren House conversation. I was not surprised. The hospitality and design networks in this region share information the way the marsh shares water. She told me she was calling with a proposal. The Aldridge studio had been losing ground. 2 of the museum collection contracts had gone through curatorial leadership changes, and the incoming directors had brought restoration work in-house as a cost containment measure. The private commission waitlist had shrunk. She had restructured twice in 18 months. My brother was managing the contraction, but the math was increasingly difficult. Her proposal was straightforward. She wanted Saltmarsh to affiliate with the Aldridge studio as a subsidiary. She would provide established relationships with high-end interior designers and antique dealers who already trusted the Aldridge name. She would provide distribution infrastructure. She would provide, in her words, credibility in the market that my work had not yet had time to accumulate. In exchange, she wanted 51% equity in Saltmarsh. Majority control, operational input, the ability to move production into the Aldridge facility. She said it was the intelligent move. She used the phrase brand amplification with complete seriousness. She said family enterprises were stronger as unified structures. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I told her I would think about it. This was not the truth. I already knew exactly what my answer was. But I had learned, in the years since I left her house, that decisions made from old wounds rather than current clarity tend to look different a year later. I wanted to be certain that my answer was mine, and not just the echo of the girl who stood in that kitchen doorway, watching her cups get set outside on the step. The next morning, I drove to a boat landing at the edge of a tidal marsh about 20 minutes from my studio. I go there sometimes when I need to think somewhere that has nothing to do with clay or fire or the particular smell of a working studio. I sat on the hood of my car and watched the light come in low across the water. The marsh grass was doing what it does, bending in one direction, holding, bending back, consistent in its inconsistency, present regardless of conditions. I thought about my aunt's index card in the ceramic pot. I thought about $11,400 quietly accumulating in an account she never mentioned. I thought about Vera, who had moved across 2 states to work at Saltmarsh and bought a house here 6 months ago because she said she wasn't going anywhere. I thought about $110 on my first market day, and the woman who came back the following week with her daughter to buy a second piece. I drove back to the studio. I called my attorney. I signed the rent house contract. I called my mother that afternoon. I told her I was declining her proposal. I told her I understood she was managing a difficult contraction and that I hoped the Aldridge studio found its footing, and I meant that sincerely, without irony. She had built something extraordinary from nothing, and I had spent enough years studying what that required to know it deserved respect, even when the person who built it had not always been respectful. But I told her the truth. I told her that on a Sunday afternoon 9 years ago, she picked up 2 pieces I had spent 4 months developing and put them outside like cleared clutter. I told her I understood she genuinely believed she was being practical. I understood she thought she was protecting me from a market that would be indifferent to my effort. She wasn't wrong that the market is indifferent. What she was wrong about was whose problem that was to solve. The difficulty was the instruction, not the obstacle. I told her that the business she wanted to affiliate with was built from an $11,400 foundation, that her sister had assembled in secret because she understood something about me that my mother had looked directly at and declined to see. I told her that Vera, who shows up to the studio before I do every single morning, is not there because of the Aldridge name. She is there because Saltmarsh is something she believes in. And I could not take that and put it inside a structure that would hand my mother the controlling vote. I told her I wasn't interested in the Aldridge credibility anymore. I had built my own. The line was quiet for long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then my mother said, very quietly, that my aunt always said I was the one who would know what to do with difficulty. I told her my aunt was a very perceptive person. I said goodbye. I was not unkind. Unkindness would have required more of my attention than I wanted to give the conversation. I was simply finished. The rent house partnership launched the following quarter. The first delivery went to 3 properties. Within 6 months, all 11 were using Saltmarsh tableware at their breakfast and dinner service. I hired Vera as my production manager and brought on 2 additional studio artists and an apprentice straight out of a ceramics program in Asheville, who reminded me of myself enough that it was occasionally uncomfortable. We expanded into the neighboring unit in the building when it became available and converted it into a dedicated glaze lab. On the top shelf of the cabinet above my workbench, between my first firing notebook and a hydrometer I've had since graduate school, sits a small ceramic pot. It's one my aunt made herself 30 years ago, when she was still throwing regularly before her hands started giving her trouble. Buff stoneware, cobalt slip decoration, a small hairline crack along the lower third that she never repaired because she said the crack was honest. Inside it, still folded exactly as she left it, is the index card. I don't need to unfold it, I know what it says. But I keep it there because it is the most accurate description I have ever been given of what I was doing, even before I knew I was doing it. And because some things deserve to stay visible, not as reminders of where you came from, but as evidence of who was watching while you figured out where you were going. My aunt taught me what she knew the way people teach the things that matter most, not directly, not as instruction, but as demonstration. She showed up. She watched. She quietly made sure I would have what I needed when I needed it, and then she let me need it and find it myself. My mother built a name that outlasted most of her competitors and earned the trust of institutions that are not easy to impress. I will never pretend that isn't something. But she spent so long building the structure that she forgot to ask what the structure was for. I know what Saltmarsh is for. It's for the work. It's for Vera coming in before I do because she believes in what we're making. It's for the woman who came back to the farmer's market the second week and told me the cup I'd sold her had changed the way her morning felt, which is a strange and specific kind of thing to say, and which I have never forgotten. If someone has looked at what you make and told you it was just a commodity, that anyone could do it, that you were trading a sure thing for a beautiful mistake, I want you to hear this as plainly as I can say it. The surest thing was never theirs to offer. You carry it. You have always been carrying it. Build the thing that needs you to build it. The rest tends to follow.